Princes and Priests. Chapter 17. Forest Fires. They moved on slowly and carefully, picking a path that was as much hesitation as forward motion. It was getting darker, and there were more movements around them, but Shannon didn't stop. 3 days of this had them all tense and on edge, but still moving forward. Salma hissed and looked upward for a place to escape. Shannon just nodded in reply and shifted the hold he had on the sword that he now carried out at all times. He just kept picking his way onward, not stopping for camp as usual. No one spoke a word. They could see Salma's hair on end, and that was enough to know that it was more than just zombies tonight. Raven started to build a scan, but Shannon turned, pointed at him, and shook his head. Raven dropped the scan, suddenly very fearful of what was out there. Shannon had never had that look on his face before, and if Shannon was tense, they were all lucky to even be alive. The fight came right at Shannon. It shot out of the night at him. Shannon threw his fingers out at the thing. It was slammed backward into a tree with a crushing noise, and then slid down into the darkness. It was not a goblin, but faster, meaner, and more human-like in appearance. It did not come alone. There were several that charged Shannon at once. He had time to hit only the one with the blast from his hand before he was forced to bring up his sword for battle.
"What the hell is that?"
Theo yelped, his voice cracking a little.
"Trolls!"
Salma shrieked. She swiped at the throat of one that had come from the side, rushing for Tavia and Travis. Trolls swarmed out of the trees at them. Dave sent fire into his blade and attacked. A light flared up above them, aiding their sight and making the trolls shy back a little. Even let out a horrible Oirion battle cry, and Raven shouted a prayer of victory. The attack came so quickly, they were separated and lost track of each other as they all fought with everything they had. A troll attacked Theo. He hit it in the face with the butt of his staff. The stone on the top began to glow faintly, but he didn't notice as he struck again and again. Each time he hit, the stone grew brighter. The troll was stunned for a moment. Even so, the troll knocked Theo back, and he tripped in the snow that lingered in the deep shadows. As the troll reached to grab him, he thrust the staff up to block the thing. The claws on top of the staff snapped open. A bolt of light shot out, hitting the creature in the chest. Theo watched as the stinking creature crumbled into chunks of charcoal and ash. It collapsed straight down on him. His heart was pounding so hard that he could hardly think to even get up.
"Theo!"
Dave yelled at him. Theo looked around suddenly, just in time to swing the staff at another charging troll. As the staff hit the troll, the power that exploded off of it blew the troll backward out of the light and nearly made Theo's hands go numb.
"I love this thing,"
he shouted as he used it to get up. He was on his feet just in time to see Tavia caught by a troll. She was flung aside by the large creature, separated from the others. She managed to keep hold of Travis, who screamed as he and his mother rolled in the underbrush. Theo shouted and ran for them. Ducking past Dave, he swung the staff at the troll as hard as he could. The top of the staff cracked the troll in the side of the head. Blue fire engulfed the troll for one moment before it collapsed as ash. Tavia scrambled back toward the light with her son in her arms. Theo caught her hand and pulled her up. Oirion was there in time to drive his sword into the chest of another troll. It convulsed, its eyes melting as it jerked itself free from the sword, but not from the magic that was burning it up from the inside out. Travis broke free of his mother and ran to Theo. He clung to Theo's legs, crying, desperate to hide there. Oirion yelled a warning at Tavia as he was knocked back by an attack. Shannon somehow grabbed her and swung her out of another troll's reach before quickly chopping off its arm. The trolls saw what they thought to be the weakest person, along with the child of the group. They turned to swarm at them. Oirion went from being right in the middle of the battle to standing alone as the beasts darted at Theo and Travis. The staff wasn't going to be enough. It killed everything it touched, but there were too many, and Theo couldn't move with a child hanging on him. Theo was sure he was about to die, and Travis with him. They were so close to help, and yet so far away. He might have given up and just died quickly if not for the child that needed him. He felt himself scream as a troll caught his arm and nearly tore it off with his claws. But he didn't hear his own voice over the roar of the fight. He almost dropped the staff, but held on as tightly as he could with the other hand. Shannon leapt into the fight, slamming into the troll that was grabbing at Theo's shoulder. The creature shattered into icy crystals, splintering and throwing out a cloud of ice dust that was so cold it burned the other trolls caught in it. Shannon stood right next to Theo, wielding his sword with deadly accuracy. The blade was wicked and glowed with magical energy that Theo hoped the priest didn't know about. It blazed a crystal blue with the power Shannon had sent into it. Theo was, again, awed by Shannon's hidden power. He wanted to cheer and to burst with pride at the truth. No one had any idea. Shannon advanced, swinging the sword with inhuman speed and accuracy as he moved on the trolls. The light from his blade streamed in tracers that flowed behind it. The devastating cutting edge sliced through whatever it touched, passing through the trolls as if they were nothing but air. Arms, hands, heads, and torsos were cut off, driving the trolls back. The company had never seen him fight with that sword, or with such skill. Theo was truly awestruck. He could not do anything but watch the man move. He had seen master fighters before, but never anything like this. He had even seen those who were said to have mastered the fighting style of old, but nothing compared to what he saw now. Kelly stepped in. Her sword had become a brand of fire that burned as it cut, setting those she met on fire. Between blows, the runes down the blade glowed and sparked. Illuminating the fight with awesome power, the sword offered distraction to the trolls. For a moment, Theo was entranced by her blade as well.
"Theo, move!"
Shannon yelled. Theo's awestruck immobility at Shannon's fighting and Kelly's sword instantly broke at the sound of Shannon yelling, and he acted quickly. He grabbed the boy and spun, trying to find a place away from the fighting. His arm exploded in pain, and he almost blacked out. Before he had a chance to get steady again, there was a howl. It was a long, shrieking, piercing sound that could be heard even over the roar of the battle. The trolls immediately broke off. They suddenly fell back, vanishing as quickly as they had come.
"Anyone hurt?"
Salma asked from the trees above.
"Where's Raven?"
Shannon asked, looking around.
Injuries first,
Oirion said. He moved toward Theo, whose arm was clearly snapped, the bone sticking out through the skin. Theo almost gagged when he saw the tangle of flesh and bone that had once been his arm. Shannon hesitated, swore under his breath, but came over to Theo. Theo looked up at him. The bleeding had already drained Theo's face of color, and the understanding of how hard the bleeding would be for Shannon to deal with made him even whiter. Shannon took Theo's slender arm and hand. In one move that made Theo scream again, he jerked it back into place, twisting it until the bones lined up. Shannon used a thread of power to stitch the wounds and to brace the bones, as he sent fire into the deep gashes, searing them closed. He had to stop the bleeding and the pain quickly before it drove him over the edge. It was effective, painful but fast. It was all over before Theo made another sound or before Oirion could object. Shannon then went to Kelly. Her leg was torn open across the thigh and bleeding. Without even asking, he used the same technique to mend her wound. 3 trolls were still moving on the ground, trying to get up. He walked over to them, stabbing their heads one at a time. They went limp, dead. Tavier pulled Travis against her, hiding the blood and injuries of the others from his eyes. He wrapped his arms around her, very still and very quiet.
"Spread out. Find the dwarf,"
Shannon ordered. He needed to get out of the battle area quickly. He needed to get some distance between himself and both Oirion and Theo. He had to focus to keep himself from drawing on the power that he knew he might well need before too long.
"Maybe he's dead,"
Salma said.
"Kill a wizard priest?"
Shannon asked sharply.
"Not likely."
He would know. If such had been killed within 100 miles, he'd know, and she knew it. They spread out and searched the immediate area, but could not find Raven. Shannon found his axe a few yards past the light of the flare. He could feel the energy of the flare that the dwarf had made. It was a dwarven power, not a priesthood power. He wondered if Raven had any idea how powerful he was as a dwarf. He found blood, Reven's blood, splattered on a leaf. He needed it. He was dangerously drained, and if he did not get energy before Oirion or the others came close, he might be driven over the edge. He knew what would happen, but he had no choice if he meant to stay and aid these people. Kneeling, he pulled his glove off and wiped his fingertips over the leaf. The blood smoked and absorbed into him. He closed his eyes as shivers of pleasure went through his body. His breath shuddered as he was sent into a blood high. It was several minutes before he could pull his glove back on. The high lasted for several moments as the others searched the area. He was starting to crash and feeling sick when Oirion walked up to where he knelt.
You find anything?
Oirion asked. Shannon didn't look up. Chances were that the blood high still showed in his face. He stood, feeling nauseated and ready to vomit. He put the back of his hand to his mouth.
Just his axe,
he said, careful to shield even his voice. He moved past Oirion as fast as he could. He hid the fact that he was shaking and sick by strapping the axe to his back. He tried to swallow the tightness in the back of his throat. He could do this. It wasn't that much blood. He could do this. He could swallow it. But fighting it with Oirion so close was a challenge in itself. It was not going well.
Now what?
Theo asked as Shannon approached. Although Theo did not look so well, he was feeling better as the pain-killing herbs that Tavia had fed him began kicking in. Before Shannon could reply, he had to quickly step out of the group and out of the flare's light. His stomach began to roll and he lost it. He held onto a slender tree and kept himself from going to the ground. Unaided, his knees would have given out. His body rejected the energy of another's blood and sent him into dry heaves. Not in over 1,000 years had he lost it in front of anyone. Now, here he was, all but helpless, his eyes tearing over and his body trying to purge his soul. No one spoke. When Shannon was able to get control again and catch his breath, he could hear the silence. No one even moved. He covered his mouth and walked back to Kava. He pulled the canteen from Kava's belt in silence. He took a mouthful, held it a moment until his body recognized it as clean water and calmed itself. He spit the mouthful out before he took a drink.
What's the plan?
Theo asked again.
We go get him,
Shannon said softly.
Shannon,
Oirion said.
this group is not warriors, not even hunters. That'll get us killed.
Shannon looked at the priest. He felt sick and was not at all in the mood to fight with Oirion about anything. He would rather have them all just leave him alone anyway.
Fine, take them out. Whoever wants to go with Father Oirion, do so. If any of us live, then we'll meet at the edge of the forest.
Theo, come with me.
Oirion said.
You're hurt and of little help to him.
I'm going with Oirion.
Even said.
He can't fight through alone.
Sorry, Shannon.
Salma said, dropping down from the trees.
I am not staying in these woods longer than I have to.
Do what you will,
Shannon said, turning to the trail that was left by the trolls. Dave, Kelly, and Kava followed him. Tavia and Travis reluctantly watched them go, as they stood with Theo and Oirion. The trail wasn't that hard to follow, as the trolls made no attempt to hide it. They were far faster in the woods, but not skilled. By the time the sun rose, Shannon's small company had not caught up yet, but were clearly still on the trail. They had to stop and rest, eating a small meal before preparing to move on.
Let me run ahead,
Kava said.
I can locate the group, tell you what I find.
Shannon nodded. Although he didn't need a scout, he could follow the trail of Reven's energy, and a child could follow the trail of broken branches and footprints that led through the forest. More than that, he knew where they were going. He could taste the powers. He could feel the one that they would fight. There was a need for haste for Reven's sake, but he had no fear for himself. He had dealt with far worse, with a lot less. Kava rolled his shoulders. They came out with an audible pop. He rotated his hips and dropped down, looking suddenly very orcish, sort of hunched down and wide-shouldered. He dropped onto his fists and was gone, silent and fast.
That's bizarre,
Dave said with a shudder. They had little time to waste. Dave knew that Shannon was taking their fears and using them. Dave was just too calm inside, and they were neither tired nor concerned for Oirion and the group with him. It was nice to have Shannon around if you were in hell. For a moment, Dave almost said as much, but let it pass. The look his uncle had was not a good one. The sun had set, and it was quickly getting dark when Kava met them on the path.
Just ahead.
He whispered.
What happened?
Dave asked.
There's a castle up there.
Kava said.
They took him in there. It's better to just see it.
They followed Kava up the trail to the edge of the trees. There was an open stretch that had once been a large river, but was now mostly dry. The castle itself had been built on an island of bedrock. The rocky riverbed stretched across to the island base, which gleamed softly in the moonlight. The fortress rose up from great foundation stones with water stains, indicating that the castle had often been submerged in the river in wetter decades. The river on this side of the island was now little more than a dozen feet across, and looked to be only ankle deep for most of it. There were lights coming on in the high windows, but there was no other outward sign of life. It was a fortress constructed in an old style that was both tall and strong. There was one gate on the eastern wall that they could see, but it had no visible guards. Shannon nodded to Dave and glanced up above the wall.
3.
He told his nephew, offering a little lesson on spotting demon wisps. Part of the lesson was where and when to look for them. Dave had been taught how to see them as a child, but now he was learning when to look.
Any other way in?
Dave asked Kava, feeling a little uneasy with that power he saw up there.
Nothing you or I could use. Salma might have, but not us.
What do we do then?
Dave asked.
Light the forest on fire.
Kelly offered. She looked at Dave and Kava's skeptical looks.
It's a good tactic. It's been used before and it works. I've seen it.
That might work.
Shannon said softly, not needing the explanation. He looked over at her.
Can you do it?
With this, I think so.
She patted her sword.
If not, the flint and steel can. It might take a while, but yes.
She and I could do it. That would speed it up. And I won't use flint and steel, but Orkan magics.
Kava said with a smile.
It won't take long. Just let's get a plan to meet someplace.
He offered.
Down the old river, maybe?
No, everything chased out of the fire would go down the riverbed.
Kelly said.
What about if we met westward? We could just cut due west and out of this damned forest.
Cute.
Dave said at the pun the name.
What's upstream of the castle?
Shannon asked Kava.
The river splits. There is the island that the castle was built on. Upstream on the near side, it looks a lot like this side. On the far side, however, a mountain rises right up from the river. There is a stream that runs down almost directly across from us. The river gets deeper below that.
How big is the stream?
About 4 feet wide and 2 deep.
Gravel or mud?
Solid stone as far as I could tell.
Go up that. We'll meet someplace up there.
How big of a fire do you want?
Kelly asked.
Fire is fire. Burn the whole thing down if you want.
Shannon said. Kelly smiled a wicked little grin. They moved back to the deeper shelter of the trees. While Kava and Kelly headed eastward off the trail, Shannon and Dave circled west down to the riverbank and waited in the dark. They crouched, shoulder to shoulder, under the forest boughs that rattled with dead leaves on a chilly night breeze, and waited for the fires to start.
What do you think about Oirion and Tavia?
Dave whispered, pulling his cloak tighter to keep warm. He wished he had on his fur poncho that the orcs had given him.
They are both adults.
Shannon whispered back.
Yeah, but he's a priest.
Dave said.
He's vowed.
Shannon gave him a flat look.
That doesn't impress me much.
Shannon shrugged.
If you make a vow on false pretenses, then you do not make a real vow. He was lied to. He vowed to the lie, and the idea behind the lie. The idea is a fantasy, and the lies void his obligations.
They sat for a while longer, waiting.
Are they all right? Can you tell?
Dave asked of the two who had slipped off into the dark.
They are fine.
Shannon,
Dave said softly.
do you know if my father ever made it to shore for certain? I mean, did he die in that grass?
He is fine.
How do you know?
I know.
Then where is he?
South and west.
He's fine.
Dave was quiet a bit before he had to ask again.
You really wouldn't mind if Oirion and Tavia were together?
I think you and the others put far too much on their relationship.
Shannon said.
But...
Dave started again. Shannon looked over at him flatly, telling him to be quiet and stay alert. Dave nodded and paid closer attention. The fire to the east started not too much longer after that. The wind seemed to catch it just right, so it grew and began to spread at once. It took to the dry leaves and slender branches. Soon it roared up and across the canopy. Cries were heard from the castle, and the gate swung open. Shannon drew his black cloak around himself, put the hood up over his head, and got up. Dave followed. They walked out onto the gravel. They took one step at a time through the exposed darkness. The fire roared up and grew bigger and brighter with every minute. It lit the sky and gave enough light that before long they were hardly hidden at all. Yet Shannon moved one step at a time. Dave realized it was not from mere eyes they were hiding, but the demons on the wall top. He followed closely and just as slowly. There were men and orcs, goblins and trolls pouring out of the castle to deal with the fire. Magic was used to try to smother it, but the wildness of the local energies countered the magic, making a billowing effect that spread the fire even farther. It gusted back and forth until, with a blast of heat and a boom, it exploded out over the treetops, catching several thousand trees on fire at once. Dave caught his breath and stepped back. He was surprised when Shannon flinched down and away from it. Shannon stood, not moving, with his back to the fire for several minutes. Slowly, he turned and looked back to the gate. They carefully waded across the river to the island and climbed up the bank to the foot of the wall. The gate stood open with creatures racing out. Shannon led the way, right to the edge of the gate itself, and waited. His eyes focused upward toward the gate top, where the demonic guards remained perfectly still. He touched Dave's arm softly, in the way he had when Dave was young, to let him inside his shield a little. It was just enough for Dave to see what Shannon was doing and how he did it. Dave watched as Shannon drew power up out of his core, a rare form of magic for Shannon. That was wizardry, and it always made Shannon tired and irritable. He held it until it reached a higher level than Dave had ever seen. He watched as Shannon cast it, in one move, into a ward of glowing white power. He kept it hidden in his shield until the ward was fully set, then he let a hint of power escape his shields. The 3 wisps were on them at once. Shannon grabbed each with a rope of magic, snatching them out of the air. He pulled them toward him as he revealed the ward, shifting it to the skin of the shield. They hit the shield and the ward at the same time. As the demons hit it, before they realized they had been caught, they were burned up. It was quick and left no mark. To Dave, it seemed that their energy had to have been absorbed by Shannon. It alerted no one at all to the fact that the 3 were attacked, let alone defeated. Dave knew he would never forget the ward he had seen, and if he had to, he would be able to repeat the spell, recalling every detail. That was the greatest gift Shannon had given him. It was the only way he or his father had mastered the powers they had with so little training.
Stupidity,
Shannon whispered, as clouds began to move in quickly, brought in on a cold wind. Lightning cracked in it. Before long they could hear thunder, and in just a few more breaths, it was over them. The rain cut down, but it was going to take a lot more than a mere burst of rain to put the fire out. For one moment, the fire seemed to fall back, but the rain did nothing but make smoke boil and roll off the forest. The rain became thick with ash, coating everything in streaking ashen mud. Lightning cracked, creating an instant of illumination. Dave could see that Shannon was already on the move, running through the main gate. Dave darted after him, and then they were inside the fortress. The power that was rushing and tangling in response to the conflicting energies wiped out all the spells around them. Even if someone scanned for them, they would remain invisible. The yard was a paved 100-foot square, with walls that rose up, towering above them, giving the yard a pit-like feeling. Windows, tall and narrow, ran up and down the walls. Most were dark holes with flickers of motion, hinting of unknown creatures darting past. A few were lit, but they were so high that nothing in them was visible from the ground.
Now where?
Shannon didn't even have to think about it. The smells of blood and pain in here were incredible. It seemed at every turn in this little adventure, he was being further and further tormented. He still had not even recovered from the intake of the mere drop of Reven's blood that he had taken from the battle site. Now, he was all but swimming in blood. He wasn't sure what he had done to make God hate him so much, but it was days like this that he was sure that he did. The buzzing in his head was growing into a roaring thunder that never seemed to go away.
Absolutely barbaric.
He half snarled. His stomach rolled and his eyes began to burn. The leftover energies here were enough to destroy the place. He led the way in through a side door, sending a blast at the man who was just coming out. The man hit the back wall and slid down it, leaving a bloody smear on the wall. David was chilled at times by Shannon and how death was so casual to him. Shannon dealt it without so much as a flinch. Inside the fortress, Shannon looked around and chose a hallway as if he knew the place and was just deciding which way would be fastest. Dave kept close as they went through the dark halls. The smell, the heat, and the taste of the air got worse as they went. It made Dave feel sick. He had to wonder what sort of effect this would have on a priest. Shannon picked up his pace as they began to descend. He took stairs 2 at a time and, reaching the bottom, he ran down the hallway. He hit a warded door, shattering it without even slowing down. Dave ran after him, catching up just in time to see him drop a troll that stood guard over the next door. There were 3 others already dead in the hall. Dave had seen Shannon fight before, but there was something different about how he was moving now. There was a sort of unguarded, swift efficiency to it. They entered a room that was unlike anything Dave had ever seen or imagined. The place was full of gleaming tools upon tables and shelves where there were jars of pickled body parts. There were several dead bodies hanging from hooks from the ceiling, cut up in different ways. There were charts on the wall showing the anatomy of different races, and on the far wall were tables that stood slanted upward, like easels designed to hold captives. On one was Reven. He had been stripped of the upper half of his clothes and stretched out by chains on his wrists and ankles. He was bleeding from slashes across his hairy torso. A man holding a small bladed tool was standing over Reven, while several others stood watching. Shannon threw a blast at the man, who didn't even stagger but just crumpled to the ground, his body crushed.
It's about goddamn time,
Reven roared in Dwarven. The other men in the room turned on Shannon.
Get him out of here,
Shannon said to Dave. He pulled Reven's axe from the back of his belt where he had been carrying it and tossed it to Dave. Dave circled around to get at Reven, who was already struggling to get free. With a Dwarven yell, he tore his fist through the cuff, ripping his hand, but setting it free. He punched the other cuff, shattering it. Wrists free, he slid to the floor and sent a blast of power at the men who had turned to fight Shannon. The men caught on fire, but they quickly put out the flames that had momentarily engulfed them. Echoes of footsteps could be heard as more enemies charged down the hallway toward the room and began to filter in through the doorway. The cleric in Reven rushed up, and he powerfully put his training to good use. He swung his arms around, gathering the power of the blood and emotional stain in the room. He spun it around him, burning it with holy fire. White, roaring flames whirled around him, driving back his attackers and distracting them enough for Dave to focus his attack on a vampire that was moving swiftly toward Reven. Dave lunged forward and leapt into the air, bringing his sword down with both hands, slashing into the vampire. The body dropped and slid a few feet, but the momentum of the head caused it to roll across the floor, coming to rest at Reven's feet. Dave swung his sword again, using it as he'd seen his father do once, to outline a shield, focusing and directing his magic despite the battle about him. A newly arrived vampire came straight at Dave and hurled an orb of crackling black energy at him. The power of the attack hit the magical shield, but the shield held. As the orb ricocheted off the shield, the power of it hit the wall, causing slivers of rock to explode outward and shower over them. Shannon and 6 others were locked in a battle of magic that exploded, rocked, and showered them all in sparks. The sheer release of power in the room was enough to make Dave nauseated and lightheaded. He pulled the axe from his belt and tossed it to Reven before turning back to fight the men who were streaming in.
It's a goddamn warrant,
Dave yelled. His shield was hit again, even as his own blast of power hit his attacker, staggering him back. Reven roared and swung his axe, striking between his still cuffed feet. The axe sent out a blast of power that shattered the cuffs, setting him fully free.
Go!
Shannon ordered. Dave and Raven looked at each other and dove under the table between them and the door. They came up on the other side with a yell, raising shields that sent waves of power back at the men attacking them from the doorway. The men coming from the hallway were forced back as the two companions charged towards them. They were dazed and easily decapitated as Raven and Dave each took a head off on the way out the door. They were met in the hall by an abnormally large troll. He was screaming at them and very dramatically swinging a massive club. Dave yelled back at the troll, swung his sword around in the same melodramatic manner to distract the big fellow while he readied his attack. He channeled magical energy into the swinging motion of his sword, creating a spiral of power and hurling it toward the troll. The energy hit the troll and exploded with force. The creature burst into flames, but it ran at them, not away from them. They both ran back into the room, needing enough space to swing their weapons to kill the giant troll as it charged toward them.
Get out of here.
Shannon yelled this time.
We're trying.
Raven yelled back. A goblin lunged at him from the doorway, blocking the path of the fiery troll. Dave slammed into the goblin, staggering it aside as he drove his sword into it. Raven quickly swung his axe, chopping the goblin's head off. He ducked under the thing's swinging arms and ran out the door. The headless body jerked around and stumbled back out into the hallway without its head. Dave followed them, surprised at how fast this stocky, short-legged man could move. In the hallway, the troll was still on fire and still swinging his massive club, which was now a flaming tree trunk. The fiery spectacle was enough to keep other attackers at bay for a few moments, as the creature attacked Dave and Raven with its final move. The troll charged forward with a death cry, using its last breath in a suicide attack, the spinning flaming club creating a fiery vortex. Careful to avoid the fire, Raven attacked the troll. He charged forward at first, but then to the side. Leaping up sideways to the wall and pushing off with a strong jump, Raven reached the head of the huge creature with his axe. The axe cut through its neck at the base of the skull, sending the head flying down at another target. The flaming skull, still screaming its death cry, flew into a smaller goblin, hitting it right in the gut and sending it flying backward. Raven dispatched the rest of the attackers in the hall with incredible ease, allowing himself and Dave to make it out to the yard. They only had to backtrack twice, trying different routes as Dave retraced his way out. They raced across the yard toward the gates. Halfway across the yard, now lit by the raging forest fire, the gates swung shut and closed with a boom. Below them, there was a second boom that shook the whole place. They could hear and feel stones settle as the castle vibrated.
Good God,
Dave breathed.
Ah, hell.
Raven swore as a small army turned to face them. Dave swung his sword around to loosen his shoulders, then drove it back into its sheath, cursing in various languages and with such colorfulness as only a pirate could. He reached to the nearest river of power and took it in his hands. As Shannon had taught him, he cleared his mind of everything. Forgetting about the dwarf and not thinking about his impending death at the hands of this army of soldiers and creatures, he focused on the task at hand. He drew the power through himself and told it what to do. As the power began to build, he gritted his teeth and held on even past the point when he felt like it was going to make him explode. With full concentration, he thrust his arms out with his palms toward the gate. He braced himself, but even so, the force of the massive energy blast drove him back so hard he almost fell. The gates groaned but held. He redoubled his efforts and increased the blast wave to more than twice the size. The gate shuddered and began to vibrate. The goblins and trolls in the yard shrieked, cringing down. Their effort was for nothing as the gates exploded outward in a billion slivers of wood and magical energy. The fragments shot out with such force that they buried themselves in the cringing horde, both inside and outside the gate. Smoke from the forest fire rolled in and created a scene that added to their panic. The creatures fled and fell on each other in their confusion to get away. Dave slumped, exhausted and lightheaded.
Damn,
Raven said, impressed.
that was something.
Dave drew his sword again, took a deep breath, and ran forward to meet the few that stayed to fight. They were almost to the blown-out gate when out of nowhere a man appeared. He sent chills into them both as they slid to a stop. Reven toppled backward, landing heavily on the ground. The evil within the man who stood before them made the priest all but numb, like a rabbit under a lion's paw. Reven's stomach rolled, and he was caught in dry heaves. Dave protectively stepped between the vampire and the priest. The man was young, handsome, and dressed in red leather draped over with a black cloak. His eyes were red, almost as if they were bloodshot, but they glowed with an eerie radiance. He stood there, calmly waiting for them.
"Leaving so soon?"
he asked in a sort of wicked accent. The voice almost whispered at them, telling them where he was from, but it was too old and too elusive.
"How very brave and noble to try to protect the cleric."
He smiled, showing his cat-sharp canines. Both Reven and Dave seemed frozen. They couldn't move. It was as if he was hypnotizing them in some way. The man walked right up to Dave, smiled, and then stepped around to Reven. He grabbed Reven's beard and pulled the dwarf up to his feet. He wiped his fingers in the cut that ran across Reven's chest. The vampire's eyes half closed as he tasted his fingertips, unable to hide his pleasure at the power in it. Reven tried to move, but he couldn't. The vampire was breathing a little harder, and his eyes dilated. He was about to move again when, all of a sudden, he was hit with a blast that shot out from behind the two captivated men. The strength of the blast sent the vampire flying back. In the air, the vampire caught himself and landed softly on his feet. His spell was broken, however, allowing the two men to move again.
"Shield tighter, Reven. Put your all into shields,"
Shannon ordered sharply as he came out of the door behind them, moving with a long, solid stride. Reven obeyed, shaky and ill. Without saying a word, the vampire attacked Shannon. The dwarf scrambled back, but it was unnecessary. Shannon threw another blast, and the vampire was thrown away again. The vampire's attack went wide and hit a wall, exploding it and leaving a gaping hole. As Shannon reached him, they met with swords. Dave was impressed. He had never seen Shannon actually fight before, at least not in a situation where he could just stand and watch like this. Both Shannon and the vampire used power in every move. Whoever this vampire was, he was well trained. They fought with swords, but also with unseen magical attacks that sent showers of sparks exploding on contact. Their shields lit up with explosions of light and color until they were in a nimbus of flashes and sparks of power. It ended suddenly when Shannon hit the man in the chest with a well-placed kick, sending him flying back into the wall of the building behind him.
"Go,"
Shannon ordered.
"Now run!"
The two didn't wait, running out through the destroyed gate. Shannon went to the vampire, who lay stunned. He jerked off his left-hand glove. He had been bleeding inside the glove from the fiery magic he had been exposed to, and now he was going to use it. Standing over the vampire, Shannon flicked his hand, splattering blood on the face of the man who dared to attack Shannon's company. It would be the fool's last mistake. The vampire lifted his gaze with defiance. He was young and stupid. This would-be master was nothing but a cull, one of the many that men like Oirion would hunt down and kill. Shannon had let the battle play out to allow Reven and Dave time enough to recover and get out. This man was as good as dead. Attacking Shannon was death. But first, Shannon had a use for him. He needed the vampire's power, his castle, and he needed to throw the vampire's zombies at Jerome's priests who were after them. If he could catch Jerome at his own game, all the better. Shannon had time. He would break and own this man by sunup. The vampire sneered.
"I know who you are. You will not get away with this. You do not scare me, von Armand. You're a pathetic fool. You cannot hope to beat me. You, who would risk yourself for a group of peasants. Are you stupid or just sentimental?"
He had gotten up and was ready to attack again. Shannon grabbed him by the face. It took only a moment. The vampire's eyes rolled as he struggled to breathe through his nose.
"Know me, do you?"
Shannon asked.
"Then you must know that I do not quickly kill those who cross me. This is going to be the longest night of your life." Thank you for listening. If you want to hear more, Subscribe to our channel. If you choose not to subscribe, I will visit you in your dreams, and I guarantee it will not be pleasant.